Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Amanda Lamb. In today's deep dive conversation, as WRAL continues to celebrate Black History Month, we're following hidden remnants of the Underground Railroad across North Carolina. Today, WRAL's hidden history reporter, Heather Leah, takes us to a giant swamp full of unseen dangers where freedom seekers would hide and even live in order to escape slavery. Welcome to the program, Heather.
Thank you for having me.
So, first of all, tell us about the Underground Railroad so we understand kind of the foundation here and how it worked.
Yeah, so the Underground Railroad was essentially a loosely connected system of abolitionists across the South and the North that worked together to help people escape plantations. So they would help an enslaved person escape. When it comes to the history of the Underground Railroad, it's hard to track, and that's by design, because the Underground Railroad, anyone who took part in that was at great personal risk. If you were a person trying to escape slavery and you got caught, being re-enslaved could happen, or you could be killed. If you were a free person who was Black, and you were caught helping, you could be put back into slavery or killed.
Or killed, right.
And if you were a white person who was helping as an abolitionist, you could be put in jail, or you could have your farm or home taken from you.
So it was a great risk.
It was a great risk, and because of that,
it's secret.
It's secret. People
Right.
weren't writing history down about this or sharing oral tales, so we really have to dig deep to find these stories because of how loosely connected it was. Though I will say, we do know some things about the Underground Railroad, and so this month we're visiting some of these sites that we know played a role in the Underground Railroad.
So tell me about the Great Dismal Swamp. Where is it? What does it look like? And I know you just went there, so you probably have some really good insight as to what it looked like then compared to now.
Yeah, so first of all, I want to share the depictions of the swamp from the time period. So first of all, it looked very different back in the 17 and 1800s than it does today. It was full of dangers, very real dangers. Alligators, coyotes, black bears are still very common there, wildcats, snakes, mosquitoes, which can carry disease. And even the ranger told me, even today, if you're walking through the swamp itself, not on the trails, you could walk onto something that looks like solid ground and sink straight up to your neck. So there was a lot of dangers there, and there's still dangers today, though it's a park, and so they've made a lot of safe areas where you can explore. Back then, when it was just growing wild, it was a very scary place to enter, which is exactly why, if you were a freedom seeker trying to escape a plantation, if you were on the coast,
it's a good place to hide.
Yeah, you want to hide in a swamp.
Now, this is a large area. Tell me, where it is, first of all. It's Virginia and North Carolina, correct?
Yeah.
And what time period we're talking about that people would have lived there, and then how many people?
Yeah, so, we don't know exactly. Again, there aren't exactly records of this. We do have a general idea of where the communities in the swamp would have been. They would have been called maroon colonies or maroon communities. And this would have very likely started in the early 1800s, obviously before the end of the Civil War, possibly into the 1700s. We do know that the people living there's archaeological evidence that they used tools that were left behind by the indigenous tribes of the area. Now, the tribes likely didn't live in the swamp itself. It wasn't a hospitable environment, which is why it's incredible that people did live there, choosing that just so they could have freedom. So if they were getting tools that were left behind, it's probably after the European settlers would have pushed out the indigenous tribes, but before the Civil War. So late 1700s, early to mid 1800s.
And I know there were a lot of legends, myths, kind of swirling around this environment. Again, maybe created in part to keep people out.
Yeah, so the legends about the swamp are based on real things, or they seem to be. Some of the myths were that there were giant snake balls, where there were so many snakes that they would actually tangle into a giant ball of snakes, something just terrifying and gigantic. The pictures that artists kind of put together of what the swamp would have looked like back in the day make it look like something from a nightmare, or just a children's terrifying fairy tale. You normally see freedom seekers running in the dark with shadows looming over them. Again, snakes, bears, alligators. They had made up a tale that there was a swamp witch that lived out there, and you could hear her crying into the night. Very likely a combination of coyote howls, owls, and the wildcats that live out there. But the more they created these tales, the more it kept people away who didn't know much about the swamp.
So why stay? I know there's a couple reasons that people might have stayed, but tell us, what are a few of those reasons why somebody would have stayed there instead of moving on?
Well, so first of all, you had two types of people. There were people that ran into the swamp to escape. Now, this was very common, right? North Carolina's geography played a very large role in the Underground Railroad and how it worked.
What counties are we talking about, or areas?
So we're up near like Elizabeth City area.
Okay.
But like, for example, if you lived on the coast, maybe near Washington, North Carolina, you would probably take a boat up the coast to escape, maybe north or down south. There were some places down south that were safe as well, or safer. If you were in like Guilford County in the Greensboro area, you were probably more reliant on Quakers to help protect you, hide you in the woods, and maybe get you north on a false bottom wagon or something. If you were in Halifax, you might take a river north. So the geography of the state plays a large role in the history of how the Underground Railroad worked. While swamps are very prevalent on the coast, this is the biggest swamp. So hiding in a swamp was a very normal thing to do. Terrible to imagine at the time, but that is something that you would climb into a swamp with an alligator beside you rather than go back to your plantation. And many people went into the swamp and continued north. However, some people did choose to stay, and these people formed these colonies, these maroon colonies. And these places were likely on top of a hill, and they would be living in small like lean-tos made of wood. They very likely would have pulled from the cypress trees to create a place to live, and we'll talk more about how they lived there. But the people who chose to stay probably stayed because they had loved ones who were enslaved nearby. That wouldn't be the only reason to stay.
But they didn't want to leave them.
Yeah.
They didn't want to leave them.
It's very common that, I've spoken to historians about this, that people who thought they could escape would try. But there were many people who wanted to escape. But let's say your mother is, injured, as she's older, or she's got a bad back. She may know she can't really escape.
So they just would stay. Well, this is fascinating. We're going to be back after the break with more from Heather Leah about how these communities survived in the swamp and what remains of them today. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm talking with Heather Leah about the history of the Great Dismal Swamp and its significance in our history. So tell us about life in the swamp.
Yeah, so hard and dangerous, right? You're dealing with all kinds of predators, carnivores, and you're competing with them for the food as well. And again, the swamp, nowadays, if you go to the swamp, it's been largely drained. There's still water, but not to the extent there was. In the older depictions, you can see a lot of water, right? Lots of water, lots of bogs, lots of places to take a misstep and fall and sink. So they were living on hilltops, right? And there are archaeologists who have been able to put together which hilltops they believe that these maroon colonies were on. They would be living in, again, according to depictions that we've seen, they probably, again, took from the cypress trees, which are very prevalent and very beautiful. If you see pictures of the swamp, you're going to see these tapered cypress trees. They look like they're wearing a skirt, and it's got ripples, and there's knees that come up through the water.
Really unique. Really,
very unique. So it's very iconic looking. But they would have pulled from those trees and built places to live. Probably not a full house. Again, we've got
something rudimentary.
Probably, an open side, maybe not even a door, just something that would give them some shelter. There's some evidence that they grew gardens.
I was going to say, how did they eat? What did they eat? Did they hunt?
Yeah, they did hunt. And again, from what the ranger told me, we really only have evidence that they hunted small game. They very likely weren't going after the larger game. And the larger game would have been things like alligators and coyotes. So they probably were going after the smaller things that lived in the swamp, as well as growing their own food. And I will say, very near to the swamp, still there today, you can see it, is a canal. Now, the canal is 20 miles or a little bit more long. It was built using enslaved labor, and it took over a decade to build. So understand that during that time, right on the outskirts of the swamp, there were maybe 100, 200 men who were enslaved, who were working every day digging this canal.
So this was an opportunity for them, potentially to escape.
For definitely either the people working there who got to know the swamp a lot better, and so they felt a little more safe going in. They also could help a freedom seeker. This happened in Halifax, where there's another canal built using enslaved labor, still remnants of it there today. Very common if you were a freedom seeker that you're going to approach this community where you've got people who are enslaved currently who will be willing to help you. And you could even maybe hide amongst them until you could get into the swamp, and they maybe could even help you get into the swamp. And then on top of that, you have these maroon colonies in the swamp, and you would hopefully know how to find them to help you continue north or possibly settle there.
So you're a historian and you love this stuff, but you just recently went there for the first time. So what was it like as somebody who has studied this and researched this to actually see it in person?
When you're following, as this series does, following the Underground Railroad, there's not much of that history left that's tangible. These locations, and I encourage everyone to visit these places, and these places that are connected to the Underground Railroad Network for Freedom, when you stand there, you are standing in the footsteps of people who had to make a terrible choice, to run for freedom, to go into this dangerous swamp, to risk being caught, to risk being killed, to leave their families behind in some cases. You are standing there, and in a very real history. I think it helps make it more real, and we should understand this history. We should understand the terrible choices that people had to face, but also the incredible things that they were able to accomplish and do. It is obviously,
what does it look like today?
It's obviously less dangerous today.
Yeah.
The trees are still there, beautiful trees. If you want to see the unique cypresses, they are there. There is a lake there called Lake Drummond. I would recommend that if you really want to see the larger cypress trees. That's, again, the unique ones you tend to see in the pictures. That's them. It's really incredible. It's very beautiful. There's hiking trails. You can go bicycling. You can take boats, I believe. The ranger mentioned a canoe trip. So they also have field trips. So students
and there's
are
a
coming there.
boardwalk, right, that kind of goes across it?
That's right. There is a boardwalk, and we did walk on the boardwalk. The boardwalk is right behind the visitor center. No major hikes. So if you want to visit and you don't want to do too much hiking, the boardwalk's a good option. You can just walk right on this elevated platform that goes over the swamp and takes you to see some of the beautiful places. I went in the winter, so not too much risk of bears or bugs, but the ranger did mention there are black bears. They're known for their black bear population. But again, they've done what they can do to make it a safe place, and many people visit there, and, again, field trips. So I'd recommend visiting.
Yeah, just an incredible way to kind of see history.
And I want to mention they do have an exhibit on the Underground Railroad and the maroon colonies that were out there. So it's something that you could go and learn about yourself, too.
Okay, great. Heather, as always, thank you so much for this fascinating look back at history. And thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and making us part of your morning routine. If you like what you're hearing, please rate us on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast app you use. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email that's waiting in your inbox every morning with Triangle news, events, and headlines to get you ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.